Elvis Presley, just a name. But it pulls up images, sounds, feelings. It's been decades since his first record hit big, but people still talk about him. They listen to his music. They watch his old movies. He sold 1 billion records. That's more than anyone. He starred in 31 movies. He performed over 1,100 concerts. But was he just a big star? Or did he really change how music works? Did he twist genres together? Did he make new ones? What if without him the music we listen to today would sound totally different? Think about it. Before Elvis, music was pretty separated. Black music for black people, or white music for white people. This country music stayed in its lane. Its pop music was often very tame. Then came Elvis. He came out of Tupelo, Mississippi. He moved to Memphis, Tennessee. He mixed gospel, blues, country, and pop. He didn't ask permission. He just did it, and the world noticed. A lot of people hated it. A lot more loved it. His hips were called dangerous. His voice was called raw. He was called Elvis the Pelvis. People said he was crude. They said he was just copying black artists, but he also broke down barriers. He made music that teenagers, black and white, could both love. That was a big deal in the 1950s. A really big deal. Scholars have looked at all of this for a long time. They ask hard questions. Was he a cultural hero or a cultural appropriator? Did he help race relations or hurt them? How did his look, his voice, his movements all fit together? And how did all these pieces change music forever? They dig into old records, they read interviews, they analyze the songs, they look at the business side of it all, and they keep finding new things. His story is not simple, it's complex, and it keeps unfolding even now. Number 7. How did Elvis change? What a star could be. Elvis Presley did not just sing songs. He became an image. He became a brand. He became a global phenomenon. Before Elvis, stars were famous, but Elvis took it to a whole new level. He made the musician into a kind of rock god, and that changed everything for how music stars would be seen and sold. It started with his manager, Colonel Tom Parker. Parker was a marketing genius, or maybe a marketing monster. Depends on who you ask. Parker saw Elvis not just as a singer, but as a product that could be packaged, a product that could be sold in every way possible. This was a new idea for music. Sure, movie stars had merchandise, but for a musician, it was different. Parker made sure Elvis was everywhere. He got him on TV, the Milton Berle Show, the Steve Allen Show, the Ed Sullivan Show. These were huge deals. Millions watched, and they saw Elvis move, they saw him sing, they saw him look at the camera in a way no one else did. This was live television. It was raw. It was immediate. It was shocking to many. And it created instant fame. Instant and massive. One scholar, Peter Guralnick, wrote big books about Elvis. Last Train to Memphis and Careless Love. He shows how Parker carefully built Elvis's career. Parker made Elvis a symbol of teen rebellion. He put Elvis's face on everything. Bracelets, buttons, records, movies. The amount of merchandise was staggering. It taught the music industry a lesson, a powerful one, that a star could be more than just a singer. A star could be a whole universe of products and images. Think about the movies. Elvis made 31 of them. Most of them were not very good. Critics trashed them. But they made money, lots of money. And they put Elvis on screens all over the world. They showed him to people who might not have bought his records. They solidified his image as a handsome, charming guy. Even if the plots were thin, the movies kept Elvis in the public eye. They kept his brand alive. They expanded it. This was an early example of cross-media promotion on a massive scale for a musician. It linked his music to a visual identity. It linked it to a lifestyle. And his look, his hair, his clothes, the famous gold lame suit, the jumpsuits. This was all part of the package. It was deliberate. It was part of the show. It was part of the appeal. It said something about rebellion. It said something about individuality. It said something about being different. Other stars had distinct looks, sure, but Elvis made it iconic. He made it something to copy, something to aspire to. The reach of this image was global. Elvis wasn't just big in America. He was big everywhere. Kids in Europe, Asia, Australia saw him. They heard his music. They copied his style. This was before the internet, before easy global communication. But his image still spread like wildfire. He became a symbol of American youth culture. He became a symbol of a new kind of freedom. Sociologist Simon Frith, in his work on popular music, talks about how stars are constructed. Elvis is a prime example of this construction. He wasn't just born a star, he was built into one through smart and sometimes ruthless management, through careful media placement, through the sheer force of his own charisma, and through the willingness of a new generation to embrace something new and exciting. But this focus on image had a downside. It meant the music sometimes took a backseat. Especially in the movie years, Elvis himself felt frustrated by this. He wanted to make serious music. But Parker wanted to make money, and the image, the movies, the merchandise made a lot of money. It was a Faustian bargain. It gave him unparalleled fame, but it also put him in a cage. Like a gilded cage, maybe. But a cage nonetheless. So, when we look at stars today, the ones who sell albums, but also fragrances, clothes, and appear in movies, we see Elvis's shadow. He set the template. He showed that a musician could be an all-encompassing cultural force. He showed that the personal brand was as important as the music, and maybe even more important for long-term commercial success. But what did it cost him? We see other stars struggle with fame. We see them battle their own image. Elvis was one of the first to really live that struggle on such a grand scale. He was defined by his image, even as he yearned to break free from it. But did this hyper-commercialization of an artist hurt the art itself? Did the focus on Elvis's looks in movies overshadow his genuine musical talent in the long run? And if every artist tries to be a brand today, does that make music less authentic? What does it say about us that we still crave these larger-than-life figures, even knowing the toll it often takes on them? And how much of Elvis's lasting fame is due to his music versus his expertly crafted image? Number 6, was Elvis just a thief or a bridge builder? This is a big question, a really big one, and it's been at the center of how scholars talk about Elvis for decades. People accuse him of stealing black music, of taking sounds from black artists and making them popular for white audiences, and for getting rich off it, while the original black artists often didn't. It's a fair charge, and it's a complicated truth. Let's be clear. Elvis did not invent rock and roll. Rock and roll was brewing for years before him. It was a mix of rhythm and blues, gospel, country, and boogie-woogie. As black artists were making this music, artists like Wynonie Harris, Sister Rosetta Tharpe, Arthur Crudup, and he loved this music. He listened to it. He went to black churches. He hung around Beale Street in Memphis. He absorbed it. He soaked it all in. When Elvis first walked into Sun Records in Memphis in 1954, Sam Phillips, the owner, was looking for a white man who could sing like a black man. He famously said, "If I could find a white man who had the Negro sound and the Negro feel, I could make $1 billion." And then Elvis walked in. He sang Arthur Crudup's "That's All Right," and Phillips found his man. So, yes, Elvis took songs that black artists had recorded. Hound Dog is a perfect example. Big Mama Thornton had a hit with it in 1953. It was raw, it was powerful. Elvis heard it. He made his own version in 1956. His version exploded. It was a massive hit. Thornton, despite being the original, saw little money from his success. This is a common story in music history. It's not unique to Elvis, but it's a crucial part of his story. Scholar Michael T. Bertrand, in his book Race, Rock, and Elvis, talks about the cultural dynamics of this time. He explains how racial segregation in America meant black music was largely confined to specific markets. It was called race music. White radio stations rarely played it. Black artists faced huge barriers. Elvis, being white, could break through those barriers. He could get played on white radio. He could get on national TV. And this is where the bridge builder idea comes in. Did Elvis make black music acceptable to a wider white audience? Did he open doors, even unintentionally, for black artists to follow? Some argue yes. His music, soaked in R&B and blues, introduced these sounds to millions who would have never heard them otherwise. After Elvis, white teenagers were more open to listening to artists like Chuck Berry, Little Richard, and Fats Domino. These artists also started getting more airplay on mainstream stations. Consider the role of Memphis, too. George Lipsitz, a scholar of American culture, writes about Memphis as a crossroads. It was a place where black and white cultures mixed, despite segregation. Elvis grew up in this environment. He wasn't just listening to white country music, he was listening to everything. He was a product of that Memphis soundscape, and he brought that mix to the world. But it's important to remember the context. This wasn't a fair exchange. Black artists were still marginalized. They were still underpaid. They still faced racism. Elvis's success while bringing exposure to the sound did not magically erase the systemic inequalities. It sometimes highlighted them, it made the double standard painfully clear. Some black artists at the time had mixed feelings. Jackie Wilson, a fantastic R&B singer, once said that Elvis opened the doors for us. He saw the benefit of the exposure. Others, like Big Mama Thornton, felt robbed. And it's impossible to ignore their feelings. So, was he a thief? Yes, in a way. He benefited immensely from a system that privileged white artists and often exploited black ones. He built his career on sounds and songs deeply rooted in black culture. But was he also a bridge builder? Perhaps, yes, he was a conduit. He brought these sounds to a mainstream audience in a way no one else could at that time. He helped dismantle some of the strict genre and racial boundaries in music. No, it wasn't perfect. It wasn't fair. But it happened. His impact was complicated. It was a messy part of American history, and it highlights the long-standing issues of race and credit in popular music. It forces us to ask tough questions about cultural ownership, and it asks us to look at the economic realities of music creation and distribution. But what if Elvis had pushed harder for black artists to get proper credit and compensation? Would that have changed anything, or was the system too entrenched? Do we sometimes give white artists too much credit for introducing black music when it was always there? And how do we balance acknowledging his musical impact with the undeniable issues of appropriation that benefited him so greatly? Number 5, what did Elvis really do to country music? Elvis Presley came from the South. His roots were deep in country music and gospel music. He was a country boy. But he didn't just sing country music, he took country music, shook it up, and created something new. He made rockabilly, and that changed country music forever, even if some country traditionalists didn't like it. Before Elvis, country music had a certain sound. It was often mournful. It was about heartbreak, hard work, God, and home. Think Hank Williams, think Ernest Tubb, great music, but it was often seen as music for a specific audience. A rural, working-class white audience. It wasn't considered cool or rebellious by city kids. Elvis changed that. When he recorded That's All Right at Sun Records, it wasn't just a blues song. It was a mix. It had the blues beat, sure, but it had a country feel to it, too. It was fast, it was energetic, it was fresh, and it had an electric guitar that just jumped out. Scotty Moore's guitar playing was crucial. Bill Black's upright bass was slapping. It was different. This new sound was called rockabilly. It was country with a rock and roll kick. It kept the storytelling and instrumentation of country, but added the rhythm and attitude of rhythm and blues. It sped things up. It made country music exciting for teenagers. It made it danceable. It made it edgy. Historian Charles F. Brown, in studies on country music's evolution, often points to rockabilly as a critical inflection point. He explains how Elvis, along with other artists like Carl Perkins and Johnny Cash, who also started at Sun, pushed country music beyond its traditional boundaries. They showed that country could be raw, loud, and electrifying. It didn't have to just be sad songs about lost love. It could be about teenage angst and rebellion too. Elvis's early records like Mystery Train and Baby Let's Play House were pure rockabilly. They had that distinct Sun Records sound, a lot of reverb, a sense of urgency. They were country songs, but they were not like anything else on the country charts. And they started getting played on country radio, but they also crossed over to pop radio. This crossover appeal was huge. It showed that country music didn't have to stay in its box. It could be for everyone. This scared some people in Nashville. The Grand Ole Opry, the heart of country music, was very traditional. They saw rock and roll as a threat. They didn't want this new wild sound. Famously, after Elvis played the Opry in 1954, he was told by one manager, "You ain't going anywhere, son. You need to go back to driving a truck." They didn't get it. They didn't see the future, but other country artists did. They saw how Elvis was reaching a younger audience. They saw how he was selling records. There were artists like Waylon Jennings and Merle Haggard, who would become country legends, were influenced by rock and roll, including Elvis. They saw that country music could evolve, it could take on new sounds, it could stay relevant. Elvis showed that country music could have swagger, could have sex appeal. It didn't have to be just wholesome. It could be a little bit dangerous. This opened the door for later country artists to experiment. It set the stage for outlaw country. It set the stage for country rock. It made country music broader. It made it more diverse. Even in his later career, when he was singing ballads, Elvis still had that country twang, that gospel influence. It was always there. He never completely left his roots. He just expanded them. He showed that you could be deeply rooted in country music and still be a global pop star. So, while he broke away from traditional country, he also expanded its reach. He made it cool. He made it something that even people who didn't usually listen to country music could enjoy. He took country's honest storytelling and mixed it with the electric energy of rock and roll. And that blend created a new path for country music that is still walked today. But did rockabilly dilute the true essence of country music, leading it down a path of commercialism rather than artistic purity? Did Elvis's success make country artists feel they had to rock it up to be relevant, losing some of the genre's original soul? And what if the Grand Ole Opry had embraced him? Would country music have taken a perhaps even more radical turn? Number 4, how did Elvis make music move so differently? Elvis Presley didn't just sing, he moved. And the way he moved was revolutionary. It was shocking. It was exciting. It was called vulgar. It was called dangerous. But it changed how musicians performed. It made music something to be seen, not just heard. Before Elvis, most male singers stood still, or they swayed a little. Frank Sinatra was cool and smooth. Bing Crosby was relaxed, but they didn't really move their bodies in a dynamic way. They focused on their voice, their stage presence was refined, it was contained. Then came Elvis. He had this restless energy. He couldn't stand still. His leg would shake. His hips would swivel. His whole body would become part of the music. It was primal. It was sexual. It was pure emotion. And it was totally new for a white performer on national television. This physicality was a huge part of his appeal, especially to teenagers. Girls screamed. Boys watched, mesmerized, and probably tried to copy him. It was an explosion of energy. It made the music feel alive. It made it jump off the stage and into the audience. Scholars like Kevin J. Phipps, who have studied the cultural impact of Elvis, often point to his body language. Phipps discusses how Elvis's movements were a direct challenge to the state's social norms of the 1950s. They were seen as overtly sexual. They were seen as provocative, and that's exactly why teenagers loved them. It was a release. It was a rebellion. Think about his early TV appearances. On The Milton Berle Show in 1956, he performed Hound Dog with wild, exaggerated movements. Berle joked about it, but the audience went crazy. Then came The Ed Sullivan Show later that year. Sullivan, a mainstream host, famously tried to censor Elvis. They filmed him from the waist up. They didn't want viewers to see Elvis the pelvis. But even from the waist up, his energy was undeniable. His snarl, his hair, his intensity, it still came through, and it still created a frenzy. This focus on the visual aspect of performance was groundbreaking. It made the performer's body an instrument. It made the performer's look and movements as important as their voice. It laid the groundwork for future performers who would use choreography, stage presence, and elaborate visuals to enhance their music. Think about Mick Jagger, James Brown, Michael Jackson, all of them, in their own ways, built on this idea that the performance is a spectacle, that it's about more than just standing there and singing. Elvis's movements weren't just random, though they often looked spontaneous. They were tied to the rhythm of the music, they emphasized the beat, they conveyed the emotion of the song. When he sang a fast rock and roll number, he was electric. When he sang a ballad, he would move more subtly, with a yearning quality. His stage presence was magnetic. He commanded attention. His impact on live performance cannot be overstated. He showed that a singer could be dynamic, that they could be theatrical, that they could be sensual. This wasn't just about good singing. It was about creating an experience. It was about raw energy. It was about connection with the audience on a visceral level, and it influenced countless musicians. From the garage bands who tried to emulate his swagger to the pop stars who meticulously choreographed their dance routines. He gave permission, in a way, for performers to let loose, to be themselves, but an amplified version of themselves. He showed that the stage was a place for pure, unadulterated expression, and that expression could come from every part of the body, not just the throat. But did this new focus on movement and visual appeal sometimes detract from the musicality of a performance? Did it set an unrealistic standard for future artists, demanding they be both amazing singers and incredible dancers? And in censoring his movements, did society inadvertently make them even more potent and appealing to a rebellious youth? Number 3. Did Elvis pave the way for more than just rock and roll? And Elvis Presley is called the king of rock and roll, and that's true, he was, but his influence didn't stop there. He didn't just create a new genre or push one forward. He changed the entire landscape of popular music. He touched genres that seemed far removed from his initial rockabilly sound. He made a path for how music would be made, heard, and consumed for decades. Think about gospel music. Elvis grew up steeped in it. He loved it. He sang it all his life. His first album had a gospel song, I'm Counting on You. He recorded several gospel albums later on. He won 3 Grammy Awards, all for his gospel recordings. His deep understanding of gospel music gave his voice a power, a soulfulness that was unique. This connection to gospel wasn't just a side project, it informed his entire vocal style. It added a spiritual depth to even his most secular songs. This helped bridge the gap between religious music and mainstream pop. It made gospel accessible to people who might not have listened to it otherwise. And it gave soul singers a reference point for infusing their own work with spiritual intensity. And then there's soul music. While many black artists were already laying the groundwork for soul, Elvis's widespread popularity and his obvious connection to black musical forms helped create an environment where soul music could flourish in the mainstream. He made white audiences more receptive to emotionally charged, gospel-inflected vocals. The artists like Sam Cooke, Otis Redding, and Aretha Franklin certainly didn't need Elvis to be great, but his breaking of cultural barriers made their path to a wider crossover audience a little smoother. Scholar Greil Marcus, in his explorations of American popular culture, often discusses how Elvis opened up a secret history of American music, revealing the common threads between what seemed like disparate genres. His influence even stretched to genres that reacted against him. Consider punk rock. Well, bands like The Clash and the Ramones were explicitly anti-establishment, anti-corporate rock. But they admired Elvis's early rebellion, his raw energy, his no-nonsense approach to music. They stripped down rock and roll back to its basics, much like Elvis did with rockabilly. They looked for that original spark. In a way, his very success in the corporate machine that grew around him later inspired a counter-movement that wanted to get back to the primal energy he first represented. His raw edge influenced figures like Iggy Pop, who embodied a similar kind of wild, unpredictable stage presence. He also laid the groundwork for glam rock and pop rock. His stage outfits, particularly the jumpsuits, were theatrical. They were over the top, they were a performance in themselves. This kind of spectacle directly influenced artists like David Bowie and Elton John, who understood that presentation and visual style were crucial to being a pop icon. The idea of the artist as a larger-than-life figure, almost a mythical being, started with Elvis. This was not just about music, it was about artifice, showmanship, and creating a persona. And what about just general pop music? Elvis showed the power of a charismatic individual. He showed the power of crossover hits. He showed that a song could appeal to multiple demographics at once. He established the template for the modern pop star, someone who sings, performs, acts, and lives their life in the public eye. Every pop artist who meticulously crafts an image, who cultivates a distinct sound, who aims for mass appeal across different genres, owes something to Elvis. His impact was not always direct, it was often through opening doors, breaking down walls, and setting new standards for what a musical performer could be. He blended styles, yes, but he also blended audiences, he blended expectations. He made the musical world a much smaller place, in some ways, and a much bigger place in others. He showed that music could be a universal language even in a deeply divided world. But did his vast influence and crossover appeal inadvertently flatten some genres, making them lose their unique characteristics in pursuit of broader commercial success? Did his dominance make it harder for other genuinely innovative artists in different genres to get noticed in the same way? And if Elvis had pursued his gospel calling more exclusively, would we have seen a very different evolution of both rock and gospel music? Number two, why do we still talk about Elvis's voice so much? People talk about Elvis's looks, they talk about his moves, but let's be real. His voice was the engine. It was what made everything else possible. It was unique. It was powerful. It was full of emotion, and it's a huge reason why his music still sounds fresh and impactful today. Your scholars have spent countless hours dissecting what made that voice so special. Elvis had an incredible vocal range. He could sing low baritone notes, and he could hit high tenor notes. He could move between them seamlessly. This versatility allowed him to sing different kinds of songs. He could do a bluesy growl, he could do a gentle ballad, he could do a soaring gospel number. This range was not common. It gave his voice a richness, it gave it depth, but it wasn't just range. It was, the way he used his voice. He had a natural vibrato. That's a slight rapid fluctuation in pitch. It gave his voice a warmth. It gave it a human quality. It made his singing sound alive. And he could control it. He could make it subtle. He could make it dramatic. His phrasing was also legendary. Phrasing is how a singer shapes the musical lines, how they deliver the words. Elvis had a way of stretching syllables, of cutting them short, of pausing at just the right moment. He sang words like they really meant something. He imbued them with feeling. When he sang a sad song, you felt the sadness. When he sang an upbeat song, you felt the joy. This wasn't just singing notes. It was storytelling. Author Robert Gordon, who has written extensively on the Memphis music scene, notes how Elvis's vocal style was a direct result of his environment. Growing up, he listened to country music. He listened to rhythm and blues. He listened to gospel. And he learned from all of it. He took the emotional sincerity of country, the raw power of the blues, and the spiritual uplift of gospel, and he blended it all into his own voice. This fusion made his sound truly distinctive. No one else sounded quite like him. Think about Heartbreak Hotel. It was his first #1 pop hit. He sings it with his deep, melancholic tone. The way he draws out heartbreak, the slight crack in his voice, it perfectly captures the loneliness of the lyrics. It's not just technically proficient singing, it's emotionally resonant singing. It hits you right in the gut. And then think about Jailhouse Rock. It's fast. It's energetic. His voice is full of swagger, it's playful, it's rebellious. He can shift from that deep, mournful tone to a playful rock and roll shout in an instant. This vocal flexibility allowed him to tackle different genres. It allowed him to appeal to different audiences. His voice wasn't always perfectly pretty in a classical sense. It had rough edges. It had a snarl, and that was part of its appeal. It sounded real, it sounded authentic. It wasn't polished to perfection, it was raw emotion, it was human, and that resonated with people. Especially with young people who were tired of the overly smooth, sanitized pop music of the era. Even later in his career, when his health was declining, his voice still had immense power. His live performances in the 1970s, despite some issues, often showed off his incredible vocal prowess. Songs like American Trilogy or Suspicious Minds demonstrated his continued ability to deliver a song with power and conviction. He could still hit those high notes. He could still bring an audience to tears. So when we talk about Elvis's influence, we have to talk about his voice. It was the instrument that channeled all those different musical styles. It was the conduit for all that emotion. It was the foundation of his appeal. And it set a standard for vocal performance in popular music that continues to inspire and challenge singers even today. His voice was more than just sound. It was feeling. It was history. It was pure Elvis. But did the later commercial demands on his voice, forcing him into certain styles or movie soundtracks, prevent us from ever truly hearing the full potential of his natural vocal instrument? Was his raw, early vocal talent perhaps even more innovative than his later, more polished deliveries? And if he had received formal vocal training, would that have enhanced or conversely stifled the unique qualities that made his voice so iconic? Number one, what are we still missing about the King's reign? We've talked a lot about Elvis, his music, his image, his moves. We've looked at how he blended genres and how he changed what a star could be. But even with all the books, all the documentaries, all the studies, there are still things we don't fully grasp. There are still questions that linger. What are we still missing about the King's reign? One thing we struggle to fully understand is the sheer scale of the cultural shock he delivered. We look back now and rock and roll seems normal, but in 1956, Elvis was truly revolutionary. He upset adults deeply. He was seen as a threat to morality, to traditional values. It's hard for us today, in a world of constant shock and shifting norms, to really feel that level of societal disruption. What did it feel like to be a parent in the 1950s, watching your child embrace this wild, sexual, mixed race music? How deeply did it fracture families? We can read about it, but truly experiencing that gut-level fear and outrage is a challenge for modern scholarship. Another area is the silent voices. We have many accounts from white fans, white critics, and white musicians. But what about the depth of feeling from the black community at the time? We know some felt he appropriated their music. We know some felt he was a necessary bridge. But the nuances of those feelings, the quiet conversations in black homes and communities about Elvis, are often lost to history or not fully captured in mainstream scholarship. We hear the loud voices, but what about the millions of individual, unrecorded perspectives? How did his success truly impact the day-to-day lives and aspirations of black artists who watched him soar with their sound? We have statistics on record sales, but less on the personal, emotional toll or uplift. And what about the international impact beyond the surface? We know he was big globally. But how did his music and image truly integrate into different cultures? Did it mean the same thing to a teenager in Japan as it did to one in Germany? Did it challenge local traditions in unique ways? Scholars have begun to explore this, but the full, rich tapestry of his global reception is still being unspooled. We see the numbers, but what about the subtle cultural shifts in hundreds of different countries? How did Elvis, an American icon, get reinterpreted and reimagined in countless non-American contexts? His own inner world is another mystery. We have memoirs, interviews, biographies. But the full psychological impact of that level of fame, that level of control by Colonel Parker, is almost unimaginable. He became a prisoner of his own success. How did that truly warp his sense of self? His later life was tragic. Was that inevitable for someone who reached such heights so young? Or were there specific choices, specific circumstances that led to his decline? We can hypothesize, we can analyze, but the full weight of that lived experience, the daily pressure, the isolation, remains elusive. And finally, how do we reconcile the different facets of Elvis? The young, raw rebel. The Hollywood movie star, the Vegas showman, the gospel singer, the devoted son, the troubled addict. He was all of these things, and we often try to compartmentalize them. But they were all part of one complex human being. How do we form a coherent picture of such a multifaceted, contradictory figure? His influence wasn't just one single wave, it was many waves, crashing at different times, in different places, with different forces. Understanding this full, complex human behind the icon is perhaps the biggest ongoing challenge. We've explored 19 angles and more. We've referenced countless studies, but the king, in his entirety, still holds secrets. His reign ended too soon, but his influence continues to evolve, prompting new questions, new examinations, new ways of looking at how one man with a voice and a hip shake changed the world. So, can we ever truly separate the man from the myth, or are they forever intertwined, making a complete understanding impossible? What undiscovered recordings, lost interviews, or untold stories still exist that might drastically alter our perception of him? And in an era of manufactured pop and digital access to all music, what lessons from Elvis's unique rise and fall are we failing to learn today?